We're going to go division by division, starting in the AFC West with the Los Angeles Chargers, who themselves had a great draft overall, but their best value pick, in my opinion, was Kamani Vidal, the running back out of Troy. A common comparison for Vidal is like a sawed-off version of Doug Martin. He's about 5'8", 213, so built like a bowling ball, but still has legit 4.4 speed. He's incredibly explosive in short areas. He's tough, has contact balance. You can bang him around in between the tackles or give him some toss plays and use that speed to the outside. Very scheme-diverse runner overall. And truth be told, he was one of my 6 best running back prospects in this entire class, and he somehow fell to the 6th round. I'm not really sure why he fell that far, but history is littered with day 3 and especially mid to late day 3 running backs that fall for whatever reason and then end up being really good players in the NFL, whether you're looking at Alfred Morris to even recently Isaiah Pacheco. I think if there's any running back in this entire draft that has a chance to be a mid to late day 3 pick that ends up being a really solid contributor in the league, it's Kamani Vidal. Next up, we have the Denver Broncos, who snagged Chris Abrams-Draine, the corner out of Mizzou, all the way in the 5th round. A lot later than most people, myself included, expected him to go. He's got a more slender frame than a lot of corners in this class, but makes up for it with excellent feet, hips, explosive ability as a mover. If we're just talking about sticky man cover corners, he is among the best pure man cover corners in this class, without question. And he has ball production. We're talking about 12 forced incompletions on the year to go with 4 picks, a forced incompletion rate of 22.2%, which is extremely high. Good corners typically have somewhere around 15 to 18%. If you're in the 20s, that's among the best in this class. So yes, he's a little bit smaller, but boy, this kid can play corner. And if you just need somebody who can survive out in space by themselves with no help, I think Chris Abrams-Draine is one of the best pure cover corners in this whole draft. No idea why he went in the 5th round. Most people were shocked by that. And I don't really know if we're ever going to know the reason, but I'll tell you what, the Denver Broncos got themselves a good one. Moving on to the Raiders now, they picked themselves up Dylan Labe, the running back out of New Hampshire, in the 6th round. And I thought this was a great range for him to go because he's going to be a 3rd down specialist for the most part in the league, but a very good 3rd down back. Labe had one of the most insane stat lines that I've ever seen for any running back at any level of football last year against Central Michigan, where he put up 295 receiving yards as a running back on only 12 catches. That is 15 and a half yards per catch out of the backfield. Like, I've never seen a running back do that ever, but Dylan Labe did. He's a really fantastic receiving back option and a great complementary piece to that backfield. I think Raiders fans are really going to like him. And then finally, rounding off the AFC West, we had the 2-time defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, who, of course, if you give them a gigantic athletic tackle prospect and you let him fall all the way to the 63rd pick, of course they're going to take him. Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU is a freakish talent who luckily doesn't really have to play right away. He does have a little ways to go in his development. He's still a young player, but if there's anybody who I think could coach him up and get him to his full potential, it's another former BYU offensive lineman, Andy Reid. Suamataia is nearly 6'5", 326, and had a 5.04 40-yard dash with a 1.73 10-yard split. That in itself is a freakish number. And, oh, by the way, he has 34.5-inch arms, too. We're talking about a rare physical profile that, luckily, the Chiefs are so good, he doesn't have to play right now. But in 2025, 2026, Kingsley will get on the field, and I'd be willing to bet that when he does get out there, he's going to be an impact player. Moving on to the NFC West now, let's start with the Arizona Cardinals, who took one of my favorite DBs in this entire draft, Dadrian Taylor-Demerson out of Texas Tech. Is he a safety? Is he a nickel? The answer is yes, he's both. I don't really know where they're going to play him yet, but the fact that he can be your free safety, he could be your strong safety, he can be your starting nickel, and excel at any of those places means that he's going to be a weapon on defense, and he also brings special teams utility as well. He can patrol in the deep middle just as easily as he can man people up in the slot. And also, as a side note, he's a terrific person as well. I got to know him a little bit at the Shrine Bowl this year, and I think anybody within 100 miles of Lubbock, Texas would tell you the same thing. He is a beloved member of that community. I think he's going to be a fan favorite in Arizona very quickly, and hopefully he's going to play there for a long time because I adore Dadrian Taylor-Demerson. Great pick. Next up, we've got the Seattle Seahawks, and I could have gone a bunch of different directions for them, but ultimately, my favorite value pick of theirs was Christian Haynes, the guard out of UConn. If we're just talking about the zone run game, Christian Haynes is the best zone blocker out of any guard in this class. Even the ones that went ahead of him, if we're just talking about run blocking in a zone system, they are not as good as Christian Haynes. Nobody is as good as Christian Haynes. The things he does on the second level and in space, it's just art, folks. I mean, this kid is gifted in a zone-based running game. He's great on combo blocks. He has exceptional feet, hips, and balance. I think his vision is great. I never see him lose. Like, I always see him making impact blocks on wide zone, inside zone. I mean, any of the zone family, he's spectacular. And so it kind of makes sense that Seattle went after that because I think that's going to be a key component to their run game. But he's also a pretty good pass protector too. If I was going to compare him to anybody, it's probably a young Brandon Brooks, which I know is a very lofty comparison. But once upon a time, Brandon Brooks also went in the third round. So I think he has a legitimate shot of turning into Seattle's own little version of Brandon Brooks. And if he does hit that ceiling, he's going to be a great player up in the Pacific Northwest for a very, very long time. Let's go down south now and talk about the Rams, who, speaking of the zone run game, they've actually had a really interesting shift in how their run game is structured over the last 2 years, in the sense that they're going away from the zone run game and they're leaning far more into gap scheme concepts. We've seen that reflected in how they built their offensive line, kind of moving Steve Avila around. Their interior trio weighs collectively 1,000 pounds at this point. And their two running backs now are also more suited for gap scheme run games. They had Kyron Williams last year, who had one of the best seasons in all of football, and they added their best value pick this year, in my opinion, which was Blake Corum, the running back out of Michigan. He's basically another Kyron Williams for them. But I love the fit because you can see the identity of the Rams offense forming before your very eyes. They're not going to run a lot of wide zone. They're not really going to run out to the edges a lot at all. They are going to be a downhill, punch you in the face run game behind a lot of beef on the interior offensive line and two running backs that excel getting downhill in gap scheme runs. Blake Corum is one of those types of running backs. He's only 205, so he's not like your typical big bruising downhill back that you think of. But if we're just talking about the types of concepts he excels in, he has great vision, exceptional feet. I think his jump cuts are just absolutely phenomenal. He's very balanced. And if you saw him in that Michigan run game, which is also kind of structured the same way, these are the types of runs that he does best in. He's not really a wide zone type of guy. And so if I was going to peg one team for Blake Corum to go to just based on scheme fit, honestly, it's the LA Rams. And I think he's a better receiver out of the backfield than people give him credit for too. So he's got some third down utility as well. I just love this fit. I love the value. And I mostly love that I can actually see the identity of the Rams offense on paper. There's no guessing about it. They're going to go downhill and just punch you in the face over and over again. It's going to be super fun to watch. Finally, wrapping up the NFC West here, we got to talk about the 49ers, who took Dominic Pooney, the offensive lineman out of Kansas, in the third round. And I say offensive lineman because I'm not 100% sure if he's going to be a guard or a tackle for them yet. And truth be told, they might not know either. I think the fact they took Pooney means that they're going to kind of sort this out over the summer, and especially in training camp, they'll probably try him at both and just see where he lands. They're going to try to get their best five on the field. And the fact that they have Pooney, who can play both spots, honestly, on either side of the line, means that they have a lot of flexibility in how they use him. I think he's a fantastic pass protector and has some of the best mirror skills out of any offensive lineman in this draft, tackle or guard. If we're talking about somebody who can just jump out there in a really aggressive set, engage a defensive lineman, and just not let them go anywhere, that's Dominic Pooney. He's got great feet, and the mirror skills are just ridiculous. He's another one of these offensive linemen that I thought could have gone in the second round, but ultimately went in the third round, so that's a great value. And I think from day one, he's either going to challenge McKivitz for the right tackle job or maybe possibly outright win the right guard job. The Niners had a great draft overall. I do want to emphasize that. The Renardo Green pick in the second round was tremendous. The Isaac Guerendo pick in the fourth round was, it was very Kyle Shanahan, but also I love that pick too. But if we're just talking about best value, Dominic Pooney, unquestionably to me, was their most valuable pick. From there, let's head up north now to the AFC North, starting with the Steelers. And speaking of versatile third to fourth round offensive line picks that can play multiple positions, their best value pick, in my opinion, was Mason McCormick, the offensive lineman out of South Dakota State. Now, why was he their best value? If we're looking at athletic profiles, particularly relative athletic score from Kentley Platt, Mason McCormick was the 8th most athletic guard prospect out of 1,583 guards since 1987. He's 6'4", 309 with a 35.5-inch vert, which is absurd, a 1.7, 110 yard split, a shuttle of 4.45, and a 3-cone of 7.59. This dude is a freak, and he's an ultra experienced freak. He had over 50 starts across 6 seasons at South Dakota State, and uniquely for any experienced guard prospect, he also has experience calling protections as a guard. They had a younger center right next to him, and so while that center was developing, Mason was in charge of calling protections, and he did a great job at it. And of course, he got worked out as a center at the Shrine Bowl too. He had no problem snapping. He could play left guard. He could play right guard. He is just the ultimate freakishly athletic swing interior prospect. I think he could compete for the starting guard job if they didn't already have a good guard duo, which in my opinion they do. But at a minimum, I think he's going to be a great swing guard for them and give them a stabilizing presence if somebody happens to get injured, knock on wood, or even if Zach Frazier somehow, again, knock on wood, goes down, Mason McCormick can play center immediately and be great at it. So I think this is a value pick because it insulates the roster from injury concerns at multiple positions. I mean, literally 60% of the offensive line, he can play it. And for the first time in a long time, I actually think the Steelers are pretty deep up front. It's been almost a decade since I think I could say that. So I loved all of the Steelers' offensive line picks. The combination of Fa'atanu, Zach Frazier, and Mason McCormick is just stellar. But if we're just talking about pure value, to me, Mason McCormick was their most valuable pick. Moving over to Cincinnati now, we're going to keep it with the theme of talking about day 3 offensive line picks and talk about Matt Lee, the 7th round center that the Bengals took. And I know some of you are coming here thinking, Brett, seriously, we're talking about 7th round centers, but trust me, this is not your normal 7th round center. Matt Lee is one of the best pass protecting centers in this entire class, or really in the last few classes. He has a tremendous anchor and went against some really talented interior pass rushers in the ACC. He went against Braden Fisk. He went against Rook Oroboro, and he held up against everybody. I mean, this guy just does not give up pressure. He is a great anchor, and of course, he can re-anchor really well. I love his hands. He's experienced. He's smart. There's just a lot to love about Matt Lee. And even though some people take issue with his run blocking, personally for me, I think it's more system dependent, in terms of him being a good run blocker. I think if we're trying to run more of a downhill type run game, a lot of inside zone, a lot of duo, he'll be just fine. I don't particularly think he's great on outside zone, but hey, very few prospects are perfect. I think specifically for what the Bengals are trying to do, and they've kind of gravitated more to being a downhill run game in the past couple of years rather than a lot of wide zone, like maybe earlier in Zach's tenure. I do think that Matt Lee fits what they're trying to do now really well. And to get him in the 7th round, that is just a flat-out steal for me. So ultimately, the best value pick, in my opinion, for the Bengals is Matt Lee. Shifting over to the Browns now, and let's talk about more 7th round picks. How about that? Juwan Briggs, a defensive lineman out of, ironically, Cincinnati, was, I think, one of the best value picks the Browns made all weekend. They did get Michael Hall earlier in the draft to be a really talented penetrating 3 technique, and I think Juwan Briggs, as potentially Michael Hall's future backup, was a really good value for them. He didn't really get to flash a lot of his penetrating ability just based on the system he was playing in at Cincinnati. They didn't really let him get upfield that much. It was more about, just kind of being stout and controlling the line of scrimmage and doing all the quote-unquote boring defensive tackle stuff. But when he showed up at the Shrine Bowl and he was doing the pass rush one-on-ones, he dominated everybody. He was one of the best interior pass rushers at that entire All-Star game. So I think that kind of flashed what Juwan Briggs potentially could be in the NFL if he's taken off the leash a little bit. I do want to note, by the way, if you're looking at where Briggs fits into the entirety of that defensive line rotation, it's a little bit tough to project right now because they just have so many guys Shelby Harris, Dalvin Tomlinson, Quentin Jefferson, obviously Michael Hall, who they just took in the second round, Siaki Ika, the giant nose tackle prospect they took in the third round last year, Maurice Hurst, and then, of course, Jawan Briggs. I mean, they have like 9 interior defensive linemen. So it's tough to project exactly where he's going to be in the rotation or if maybe he'll have to spend some time on the practice squad. But I do think that Jawan Briggs, out of everybody the Browns took in this draft, even if he's not the highest rated player they took or the best player they took, if we're just talking about where I thought he would go to where he ended up getting drafted, I think Jawan Briggs is their best value. Let's wrap up the AFC North now by talking about the Baltimore Ravens, reigning division champion Baltimore Ravens, that is. They took Roger Rosengarten all the way at the 62nd overall pick late in the second round, and I really do think that was their best value pick. I know it seems like a little bit of a cop-out to have a very highly regarded second-round talent being the best value pick, but if we're just talking about the value that Roger Rosengarten is going to bring to the Baltimore Ravens this year, he honestly was their most valuable pick. He is an extremely polished pass protector that I don't think gets nearly enough credit for how good he is in pass pro. His first step is explosive. He gets to his landmarks quicker than a lot of tackles in this class, even the ones that went ahead of him. I love his hands. He uses a bunch of different sets. He'll jump set you, he'll angle set you, he'll vertical set you, and he's not just like a one-trick pony as an offensive tackle. And you don't see that normally with college offensive tackles. Some of them really only have one set they're comfortable with, maybe 2 at most. But Roger Rosengarten can do anything. It probably helps that he's a great athlete, but still, the point stands. We are talking about a polished day one starter at right tackle, and a darn good one at that. Moving from the AFC North now, let's go to the NFC North, starting with the Chicago Bears. And it was tempting to put Caleb Williams as their best value pick, I'm not going to lie, just based on the value that I think Caleb Williams will bring to that franchise and really transforming that franchise as we know it. But if we take Caleb out of the equation, I think their most valuable pick was actually 8 picks after Caleb when they took Rome Odunze at 9th overall. And the reason why I say that's their most valuable pick is because of the value that he will bring to Caleb's development. They already have great chemistry as it is. They've already thrown together. They were already friends before the draft. Caleb actively wanted Rome to be in Chicago with him. They just weren't sure if they were going to be lucky enough to make that happen, and they were. There was never a doubt in my mind that if Rome was there at the 9th pick, he was going to be a Chicago Bear. And I think that was the plan, or rather the hope all along. And the value specifically that Rome brings to Caleb's development is he gives him margin for error. My pro comp for Rome was DeAndre Hopkins with maybe even a little bit more hit fluidity, which sounds terrifying, and it is. But that's the kind of prospect we're talking about here. A dominant contested catcher. He's got deep speed and is also a former track champion, by the way. Like, don't get it twisted. I think people underrate his speed a little bit. I'm not saying he's got Malik Neighbors' speed, but he's got enough deep speed. He can threaten all 3 levels of the field. He's a great route runner. The work ethic is legendary. I just love everything about this pick. This is a true number 1 wide receiver that doesn't honestly have to be a number 1 right now. DJ Moore is going to be the Z. Rome will be the X. Keenan will be your assassin in the slot. All 3 roles are filled by tremendously talented players. And that in itself is the value for Caleb Williams. And if Caleb Williams works out, I mean, this Bears team is going to be good for a long, long time. So any pick the Bears could have made to up the chances of Caleb Williams being a success was going to be their most valuable pick, which ultimately is why I think it's Rome. Let's head over to Minnesota and talk about the Vikings now, who also took a quarterback very high in this draft. And if I want to take J.J. McCarthy out of the equation, just like I took Caleb Williams out of the equation for the Bears, if I want to look at picks after that pick to find their best value, for me, it's going to be Kyrie Jackson, the corner out of Oregon, who they took in the early 4th round. I loved Kyrie Jackson as a potential day 2 corner prospect who the Vikings ended up getting on day 3, hence where the value lies. And he is so Brian Flores as a corner. It's almost funny to me. He's almost 6'4", nearly 200 pounds, 33-inch arms. Yes, he runs 4.5 flat, which isn't super fast, and nor do I think he's super fluid. But if we're just looking at a linear, vertically explosive, long, strong corner whose one job is to press receivers at the line of scrimmage and completely beat them up for the first 2.5 seconds of any given play, just buying time for those blitzes to get home. I mean, stylistically speaking, that is a Brian Flores corner. They aren't necessarily interested in paying premiums for a guy who has great feet and hips and can stick to a receiver for 3.5, 4 seconds down the field. That's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for physicality and somebody who can just disrupt while pressure gets home. Because ultimately, in a Brian Flores defense, if a play is lasting for more than 3 seconds anyway, something went wrong. This is very much a live by the sword, die by the sword type defense. Loved that pick a lot, and I think he's going to be a good Viking. Let's go on over and talk about the Packers now, which, weirdly enough, I think I ended up liking their class a lot more than many actual Packers fans did. If we're just going down the board, top to bottom, day 1, day 2, day 3, I thought Brian Gutekunst crushed this draft. I really, really liked what he did, even starting with the Jordan Morgan pick. I really am a fan of their class, which pains me to say as a Bears fan. But if we're just going to zero in on pure value picks, for me, their biggest value was Marshawn Lloyd late in the 3rd round at 88th overall. Yes, I know they signed Josh Jacobs this offseason, and they still have A.J. Dillon in that backfield. But skill set wise, I don't really think that Marshawn Lloyd is going to encroach on anything that either of those guys do. If anything, Marshawn Lloyd is going to be their new Aaron Jones. He is going to be their new slashing utility weapon that can do everything from make an impact in the receiving game to the jet sweep game to, of course, also getting traditional carries and all that kind of stuff. He's a little bit different skill set than, say, Josh Jacobs or A.J. Dillon, but I think it's a very valuable skill set. I think this Packers offense has been built off of a 2-back offense for a long time now, trying to mix and match different skill sets in that backfield. They did lose Aaron Jones this offseason, but Marshawn Lloyd comes in with a very similar skill set, a skill set that going into draft weekend, I didn't think they had on the roster. Josh Jacobs is going to be their grinder that they can give, 10, 12, 15 touches on inside zone and gap schemes and power and all that kind of stuff and just absolutely wear defenses down between the tackles, while Marshawn Lloyd is going to handle all the wide zone stuff. Obviously, he can make plays on toss plays, jet sweeps, like I said, and as a receiver. And I also think that he could make a pretty big impact potentially as a kick returner, considering the new return structure. So keep that in mind as well. I just think this pick is a tremendous value for several different reasons. And even if it was maybe a little bit of a head scratcher for some Packers fans at the time because they looked at the Josh Jacobs signing, I just think you have to look at it from the lens of Marshawn Lloyd does different stuff. And up until draft weekend, they didn't have anybody on the team that could do that different stuff. And now they do. Let's finish things off in the NFC North with the Detroit Lions, reigning division champion Detroit Lions. And they have one of the most complete overall rosters in the NFC, so there wasn't a lot of glaring needs here. And they did address their main need, which in my opinion was corner, back-to-back at the top of the draft. But they did sneak in a really good value pick late in day 3 with Mekhi Wingo, the interior pass rusher out of LSU, who they got in the 6th round, pick 189 overall. He ran 4.85 with a 1.63 10-yard split, which is nuts. He had a 4.45 shuttle, a 7.33 3-cone. Both of those are elite marks for any interior pass rusher. And ultimately, that is what I think his role is. He's not going to be on the field on 1st and 2nd down. He is going to be a pass rusher. But if you're getting a very talented, very productive interior pass rusher late on day 3, somebody who's just going to add to the rotation and give you, maybe 15 to 20 snaps of fire and brimstone every single week, that's a great pick to me. I thought he could have gone a lot higher just because that role in itself is so valuable. Every team wants interior pass rushers after all. But the fact that they got him in the 6th round, I loved that value. Mekhi Wingo is a narrow role player, but he's very good in that role. And I'm very excited to see what him and Aiden Hutchinson can do together this year. Let's go east now, starting with the AFC East and the New England Patriots, who also, of course, took a quarterback really high. If we take Drake May out of the equation, like we did for all the other teams that took quarterbacks high, to me, the best value pick New England made was Jaheim Bell, tight end out of Florida State. Now, they got him all the way in the 7th round at pick 231 overall, which to me was a huge value. I thought he very easily could have gone 2, maybe even 3 rounds earlier, just on pure tape grade. And he's one of the most interesting tight end prospects in this whole class. And believe it or not, even at his size of over 240 pounds for his playing weight, he averaged 8.1 yards after the catch per reception. For context, Malachi Corley, who was widely considered the best pure yak threat in this class, he was at 8.5 average yards after catch per reception. Bell, meanwhile, at 8.1 was just barely behind him. And again, this is a big tight end that you can throw screens to, and on average, he's nearly going to get a first down on every single one of those. He's got a ton of explosiveness, great wiggle, love his ball carrier vision in the open field. He kind of runs like a running back that happens to weigh 20 pounds more than most running backs. And honestly, considering the new kickoff rules this year, I think you could argue that he might get some work as a kick returner now as well. There might only be a couple tight ends in the entire league that I might say that for, but Jaheim Bell is one of them. I think he's going to have a role really early in this New England offense, at minimum just kind of providing Drake May with some layups and potential explosive plays that he doesn't have to make any crazy throws for. Just give him the ball within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage and watch him go. Now, I did just mention Malachi Corley, which of course brings us to the Jets, and Corley himself was my best value pick for the Jets. And honestly, it's for a lot of the same reasons that I think Bell was a value pick for the Patriots. He's going to be a phenomenal yak threat for them, somebody who you don't have to stretch the field in order to get explosive plays with. You can throw him screens, you can give him jet sweeps, even just throwing a hitch or a shallow cross and just letting him do his thing after the catch. Like I said, he was the best pure yak threat in this class at 8.5 yards after the catch on average per reception. That is an absolutely insane number. He's not the best receiver in terms of contested catch skills or working deep down the field, but they have other guys to do that. Malachi Corley's role will purely be the changeup option, dare I say, the Deebo Samuel type role in this offense, the jet sweeps, the screens, all the layup throws that Deebo also gets in San Francisco and turns into explosive plays himself. That is going to be the realm where Malachi Corley operates. And I also want to reiterate one last thing. The kickoff rules, just like Jaheim Bell, and honestly, probably even more so than Jaheim Bell, they're going to benefit Malachi Corley a lot. I thought he could have gone early in the second round just for that utility alone, because he's kind of tailor-made to be an elite kick return prospect in this new kickoff structure, beyond all the value he brings as an offensive weapon. But just as a kick returner, he's going to be really impactful on special teams, somebody who not only could flip field position fairly regularly, but also just might outright get you points as a returner. He's got a ton of versatility, a ton of utility, and somebody who I think the Jets stole at the 65th overall pick. And speaking of stealing receivers, by the way, that does bring us to the Dolphins, who stole a couple of my favorite receivers in the entire draft on day 3. I had to choose between two of them. Ultimately, I settled on Malik Washington, who they got at pick 184. I absolutely love this pick. He was outrageously productive in his lone season at Virginia, 110 receptions, 1,426 yards, and 9 touchdowns. You could consider it a late breakout, but I just consider it finally going to a college team that was actually going to feature him in the pass game, and feature him they did. He basically was their entire passing offense, if we're being honest, and they used him in all sorts of ways just to make sure they could get him the ball, obviously in the screen game. He basically was their entire passing offense, and they got him the ball all over the field. Short, intermediate, or deep. He attacked every blade of grass equally. He was great after the catch. He was a great contested catcher as well, which you don't expect for somebody his size, but we're talking about a contested catch rate of over 60%. Typically, top-end receivers are usually around 55% or so. Anything above 60 is insane, and he was above 60. He's got great hands, a really low drop rate. We're talking sub 2% drop rate. He's tough. He's smart. He's a great technician. I mean, there's just so much to love about Malik Washington. If he wasn't the size that he is, which is 5'8", 191, he would have gone way, way earlier. I'm talking early on day 2, because just as a receiver, he is a really complete receiver prospect. He's also got legit 4.4 speed and a ridiculous 42.5-inch vert. So it's not like the rest of his athletic profile isn't really impressive, because it is. He just happens to not be the biggest guy. If that's the only knock on him, I'm good with it, because the rest of his profile reads like a long-term NFL receiver, and the Dolphins somehow got him in the 6th round. That brings us to the reigning AFC East Division champion Buffalo Bills, who obviously have gone under a huge roster makeover, so to speak, in the last few months. I wouldn't say it's a rebuild, but definitely a reload, and they were in a position where they kind of had to nail this draft, just because a lot of the financial considerations with their bigger contracts, they really needed an infusion of a lot of good, young, most importantly, cheap talent. It was a tall order, but they did it. They actually had a great draft overall, it was really hard for me to kind of pick who I thought the best value pick for them was. A lot of good candidates there, but ultimately I decided on Javon Solomon, the edge out of Troy. He too, just like Malik Washington for the Dolphins, probably would have gone a lot earlier if he was just a little bit taller. He's about 6 foot flat, 246, so not a really big guy, but he does have great arm length for his size. He has nearly 34-inch arms, which is a lot longer than many of the edges in this class. Even some that went in the first round, like Leatu Latu, who doesn't have that length, even though he's a lot bigger and is 260 pounds. So you have kind of an interesting profile with Javon Solomon here, who's shorter, so he has a natural leverage advantage over taller tackles, but he still has borderline offensive tackle length. That is a really unique combination, and then you package that with 37 inches on the vertical. He's got a great first step. He's really bendy. You kind of see where I'm going with this. This is a profile that is really specifically tailored to rush the passer. You ask any offensive tackles out there who they hate blocking, and it's guys that look like this. He's shorter, so the strike zone is a lot smaller for the tackle to hit. He's a lot harder to block because of that, but he also brings that length, and he's got a good first step, and he's bendy, and he's got 3 go-to moves that he can use at any given time. It's no wonder why Solomon was ultra productive at Troy. He is one of the best pure pass rushers off the edge in this class, and I do think he would have gone a lot earlier if he wasn't just 6 foot flat. A lot of teams typically care about height at this position, but I'll be honest, I don't. I've seen too many guys succeed in the league who look like this, and I think Javon Solomon is next up. All right, let's pivot to the NFC East now, starting with the Washington Commanders. Again, taking Jaden Daniels off the board here. We're not doing quarterbacks as value picks in this episode, but beyond Jaden Daniels, I thought their best value pick overall was Ben Sinnott, the tight end / H-back out of Kansas State. They got him with one of their 3 second-round picks, pick 53 overall, and I absolutely loved it the moment I heard the name. It makes perfect sense for them. They got him with one of their 3, yes, count them 3 second-round picks they had, specifically at pick 53 overall, and I love pairing him with a young quarterback because just like Malachi Corley, and even just like Jaheim Bell, who the Patriots got in the 7th round, I think Ben Sinnott is one of the better yak weapons in this class. He's going to do it a lot differently than Corley and Bell in that he doesn't have a lot of wiggle. He's not really going to make you miss in space. He's not going to run away from you, but he will run over you. If I was going to compare him to any former NFL player, honestly, it's probably Mike Allstott, which I know is a different position, but if we're just talking about pure physicality and willpower with the ball in his hands, Ben Sinnott channels Mike Allstott every time he gets the ball. He is a bull in an antique shop. That is the best way to describe him. And I think he's another one of these guys where you can give him the ball within like 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, or maybe even do it out of the backfield, and he's going to get explosive plays for you. Again, he's going to do it in a different way, but he's still going to get the yardage. He's also a really underrated blocker, in my opinion, one of the better blocking tight ends in this whole draft. And he can block in a variety of different ways. If you want to use him as like a quasi fullback or an insert blocker, you can do that. He'll sift block on the backside of zone runs. You can pull him and have him lead block in space. You can run counter behind him. Pretty much anything you can think of, you can do with Ben Sinnott. The one limitation is I don't really think he's like a true classic Y tight end, but if we're looking for a really high-end H-back, Ben Sinnott's your guy. He's going to be useful in the run game and be useful in the pass game. And out of a second-round pick, there's not really a whole lot more you can ask for. Moving on now to the Giants, my favorite value pick for them was Tyrone Tracy Jr., running back out of Purdue that they got really late in the 5th round. He is a little bit of an older prospect by running back standards, which helps explain why he went as late as he did, and he switched positions to running back in college. He only played running back in his last year at Purdue. So again, helps to explain why he went so late. But if we're just talking about pure talent, as far as running backs go, this is one of, if not the most talented running back in this entire draft. Again, he was really raw. You saw it on tape. He's still trying to figure out exactly how to read things that aren't counter. He's getting there, to be diplomatic about it. I think the vision still needs a lot of work. I think in terms of efficiency of movement, he runs a little bit wild and crazy. I mean, if you put on Blake Corum tape and then you watch Tracy right after, you'll see the difference in what a very polished running back looks like compared to a very raw running back. Tracy is very raw, but in terms of just tackle breaking ability and physical talent, I mean, he's got it over everybody in this class. His missed tackles forced per attempt was 0.42, which doesn't sound like a big number, but by comparison, it's massive. Like, that's Bijan Robinson territory in terms of pure tackle breaking ability per carry. It's an unreal number, and he doesn't even really know what he's doing yet. Like, this guy is new to the position, but he is so freakishly gifted that he was one of the better running backs in college football while barely having any experience. He's 5'11", 210 with 4.48 speed, a 40-inch vert, and background as a wide receiver, so you can use him a lot in the pass game too. That is a really, really tantalizing profile. I don't think he's going to start as a rookie because I don't think he's ready to start as a rookie, but he is going to be a really exciting complementary piece and somebody who, again, is going to be an impact player as a kick returner given the new structure of kickoffs. It actually favors people that are built exactly like Tyrone Tracy, who just need to be really explosive and good at breaking tackles. That is what he does. I'd be willing to bet they drafted him where they did specifically for that skill set, while hoping that he turns into a really effective running back for them within the next year or so. And speaking of kick return versatility, by the way, when we talk about the Philadelphia Eagles and their selection of Cooper DeJean at the 40th overall pick, which is my best value pick for them, when we talk about what DeJean brings to Philly, it's not just his ability as a DB, somebody who can play outside corner potentially for them, even though I think he's better suited for nickel because he's a really good tackler and nickel's got a tackle, but he can also play safety. And I kind of think that he's going to be one of these DBs where they just throw him on the field during camp and during offseason work and just kind of figure it out as they go. I don't think even Philly knows what spot they want him to play yet, but the fact that he can play multiple positions is really, really attractive. But again, going back to the kick return stuff, DeJean's ability as a returner, and maybe even more importantly, as a gunner in the new kickoff return structure, he is going to be monumentally important on special teams. It's not just about the fact that he can rip off explosive plays with the ball in his hands. It's about the fact that he's so good at tackling in space and getting off blocks for a DB. I mean, he's going to be one of your key cogs on the kickoff coverage unit and also probably on the punt coverage unit. I mean, hell, I'd probably give him punt return opportunities too. I mean, again, we're talking about a guy who's going to be on every single special teams unit and be a key piece of those units and also be a key piece of the secondary as well. I just cannot possibly express how important this player is going to be for Philadelphia. He's going to play 1 million snaps a game and probably do like 8 or 9 different things for this team and be good at all of them. Will he ever be the best nickel in the league? Probably not. Will he be the best outside corner on the team? I'd wager no. Will he be one of the most versatile and important players on the team? That I might say yes. And to get that kind of utility all the way at pick 40, it's an incredible value for them. And I really don't know how he keeps getting away with this. It's just ridiculous at this point. Finally, we get to the Dallas Cowboys now, who had a really interesting draft. I think it's probably the best way to phrase it. They didn't do what I expected in the sense that I thought they would go running back fairly early, and I thought maybe they would even go receiver fairly early, because if you're looking at the contracts of all their existing receivers on the roster, I thought receiver definitely could have been addressed early. But just because they didn't do what I expected doesn't mean they had a bad draft. And in fact, if you're just looking at the players they took, in a vacuum, I can't really argue against any of them. I thought they actually took a lot of really good players here. But if we're just looking at pure value, I thought the best value pick they had was Cooper Beebe, the talented interior offensive lineman out of Kansas State. Beebe is built like a tank, and he plays like a tank. He's got absolutely unreal power compared to most guards in this class, Christian Haynes included, who was also a third-round pick. I think Beebe is even more powerful than Haynes, and that's saying something. He's got a tremendous anchor in pass protection. Like, you're just not going to cave in the pocket against Cooper Beebe. But unlike Haynes, I think he sacrifices some agility and fluidity in exchange for that power, so there's strengths and weaknesses there. But if we're just looking for a guard who is never, ever going to get caved in, Cooper Beebe's your guy. In the run game, even though he's not as agile and fluid as Christian Haynes, he's still fluid enough that he can pick off linebackers on the second level. I feel comfortable pulling him out into space if we need to. It's not like he's a sentient boulder. Like, he does have some wiggle to him, and they can absolutely make it work. But for me, ultimately, his greatest strength is pass protection. In terms of role, I think he can definitely be a really good backup swing guard behind both Tyler Smith and Zach Martin. If one of them happens to go down, knock on wood, I think you can put BB in immediately and feel really comfortable with it. But he could also probably compete with Brock Hoffman at center as well, if they're comfortable with him competing at center. So worst case scenario here, even if he's not starting as a rookie, you have a very talented, reliable, swing interior offensive lineman who could potentially play at not just one, not just two, but three different positions. That is a great value to get late on day 2. I absolutely love this pick for Dallas. And even if it's not the flashy, sexy pick that maybe we expected, it's probably the smartest one they could have made. Moving on to the AFC South now, let's talk about the Tennessee Titans, who had a really interesting draft. But for me, the pick that carried the most value for them was Cedric Gray, linebacker out of North Carolina. They got him in the early 4th round, pick 106 to be exact, and I really like this fit for them. He's a rangy, explosive, fluid linebacker who excels in coverage. I think he's a good run and chase linebacker against the run, somebody who's probably going to be a natural fit at the will linebacker spot. Hopefully he doesn't have to take on too much contact because I'm not sure he's like your traditional classic stack and shed linebacker, but if he's allowed to just run and hit people in space, he's going to be awesome at that. But truly his main value, again, goes back to pass coverage. He's one of the better pass coverage linebackers in this entire class, and he's one of the only linebackers that I would honestly trust in man coverage against tight ends or maybe even big slot receivers that are 225 plus pounds. There's many linebackers in this class that I would never, ever trust in man coverage, but Cedric Gray is one of the few that I think definitely could play man and probably play it a lot. He's not a complete linebacker prospect by any means. That's why he went in the 4th round. But for the value that he brings, especially on passing downs and distances, and of course his special teams value, I think this is a great, great pick for Tennessee and one of their more underrated selections, in my opinion. Moving on to the Colts now, who had a really tremendous 1-2 punch at the top of the draft. They took Leatu Latu in the 1st round and then Adonai Mitchell in the 2nd round. And the fact that I had Adonai Mitchell as a potential top 20 pick, in my final mock draft, I put him at 17 for reference. The fact they got him all the way at 52 means, for me, that is their best value pick of the weekend. I have no clue how Adonai Mitchell fell that far. He's got phenomenal hands with a sub 1% drop rate. I think he's a true X receiver, which I can't say for a lot of prospects in this class, in the sense that I can put him on the line of scrimmage against press coverage, and I can trust him to beat press coverage. It's a more rare skill set than you think. But truly, I think the best component to Adonai Mitchell's game is just how good of a route runner he is. Yes, he catches everything. Yes, he's physical. Yes, he's got 4.3 speed. But his ability as a route runner is extremely advanced. And I'm not talking about just movement skills. Like, yes, he's got quick feet and fluid hips and all that kind of stuff. But if we're talking about the subtleties of route running, the art of route running, how to use blind spots to your advantage, how to play with pace, how to play with different releases, how to manipulate corners into being in the exact spot you want them to be so that they have zero chance of making a play on the ball, how to manipulate safeties, all the mental mind games that go into what actual good route running is, Adonai Mitchell already has those mastered. He is a tremendous, tremendous player. Again, the Colts got him all the way at 52, which I thought was an incredible value. I mean, for me, he was a top 4 receiver in this class. So I couldn't say anybody except Adonai Mitchell. And the fact that he's in Indy now with Anthony Richardson, who's one of the most talented quarterback prospects of the last probably decade, this Colts offense is going to be pretty nuts. And I'll tell you what, guys, as a Texans fan myself, I don't like that very much. This kind of sucks for me. So thanks, Colts. I hate it. Moving to the Jaguars now. They had a really intriguing draft, kind of a stereotypical Trent Baalke draft of a bunch of athletic freaks with really long arms. They really love their high upside picks there. But I think my favorite value pick that they took across all 3 days was late in the 3rd round, pick 96 overall, Jarrian Jones, the nickel out of Florida State. I got to know him a little bit at the Shrine Bowl this year, and he's a great kid, just lights up every single room that he's in. But beyond being a great person, he's also a great football player, and a really talented football player. 4.38 speed, 39.5-inch vert, 10.9 in the broad, a 1.53 10-yard split. I mean, this kid is crazy athletic. And when you take a nickel with this much burst and this much speed and you package it with the instincts that he has, you have yourselves a potential top-tier nickel in the NFL. And for me, nickel is one of the hardest spots to play in the entire sport. You have to deal with two-way goes all the time. You have to be involved in run fits. You have to be involved as a blitzer. There's really no plays off ever. And any DB would tell you it is the hardest position to play in the secondary. So if you get somebody who can do it at a high level, that is worth its weight in gold. And for me, Jerry Jones can and will be a high-level nickel in the NFL. The Jags got themselves a stud. And again, as a Texans fan, I hate this, man. Like, I'm sick of the arms race in this division. It's gotten completely out of hand. And I would love it if every other AFC South team would just chill for like a year, please. Like, it's gotten ridiculous, guys, okay? But anyway, moving on to the Houston Texans, reigning division champion Houston Texans, by the way, reigning offensive rookie of the year, reigning defensive rookie of the year, reigning, in my headcanon, coach of the year, D'Amico Ryans. Everything is looking good in Houston, okay? And there was a bunch of picks I could have gone with here. I love the Kamari Lassiter pick. I obviously love the Solomon Byrd pick as well. But for me, if we're just going on the best player that they got for the best value, I had to go with Kalen Bullock, the safety out of USC, who they got in the middle of the third round at pick 78 overall. Bullock is going to give this Texan secondary some much-needed range on the back end. They do have Jimmy Ward and Jalen Petre as their current slated starting safeties, but honestly, both of them are also kind of hybrid nickel types. They don't really have a true free safety that you're just going to put, maybe 12 to 17 yards back, patrolling the middle of the field, literally having sideline-to-sideline range. They don't really have that kind of classic post safety, or at least they didn't until they drafted Kalen Bullock. I think he gives them the freedom to live in a lot of three safety packages, considering the other safeties can also play nickel, and I also think he gives them the freedom to play a lot more cover three. You can't really play cover three unless you have a really rangy free safety that can play both seams at once, essentially. Think Earl Thomas back in the Legion of Boom days. The coverage is really hard to play well unless you have that kind of range back there, and I don't think they did before. But now with Kalen Bullock, if they want to play cover three all day long, they can. He also has the feet and hips to handle quarters duty if they want to play a lot of quarters. If they want to play some quarter half, he can do, honestly, either of those. So I just love the scheme versatility that his feet, hips, and range bring to this Texans defense. Safety wasn't the top need for them, of course, but I think Bullock was just too good of a player to pass up. And selfishly, I'm really happy he's in Houston. Moving on now to the NFC South, our last division today, and we're going to start with the Carolina Panthers, who had a really fun draft, honestly. I thought they did a great job of stacking offensive talent to help out Bryce Young, but out of all the offensive talent they collected, for me, the best value pick they had was Jonathan Brooks, the running back out of Texas. If Brooks did not tear his ACL, I think he had a legitimate shot of going in the late first round. He was the number one running back in this class to me, easily, and when I watch him on tape, he reminds me a lot of Alvin Kamara. That is why I see this as such a great value pick, because he reminds me of all the value that Kamara has brought to the Saints organization for the last several years at this point. And I don't just mean as a receiver, but also as a runner too. Kamara's always been typecast as this kind of like receiving change of pace back, which, yes, obviously he catches the ball really well and he's a great receiver, but he's actually a really good short yardage power back as well, and he's great in the red zone too. So he's a little bit of everything, actually a lot of bit of everything. And I think Jonathan Brooks is the same way. Yes, he is a great receiver. He has great hands. He's awesome after the catch. He's going to get explosives on third down. But he also has amazing vision, incredible contact balance. I think he's awesome in short yardage. He's going to be a demon on the goal line. And I think stylistically as a runner, he also reminds me of Kamara because he just doesn't go down on first contact. He has that unique kind of Alvin Kamara-ish contact balance where he can kind of disjoint his upper half from his lower half and just eat tackles to his legs constantly, and somehow he doesn't hit the ground. He's like a weeble wobble. It's a very rare trait to just have full-grown men bounce off of you constantly, but that is what happens to Jonathan Brooks. His contact balance is so good that even though he's not the fastest running back, he doesn't have the most burst, he's still the most effective. At the end of the day, usually the best running backs in the league are the ones who have the best vision. They also have the best instincts. They also have a really good feel for how to set up their linemen to have more favorable angles to hit their blocks, which Brooks checks all those boxes. But they also can just break tackles. It's not about being the fastest. It's not about being the most physically gifted. It's just about having vision and breaking tackles. That is what Jonathan Brooks does. And when he gets healthy, he is going to be the engine of this offense. That, to me, is incredibly valuable because it makes it so that Bryce Young doesn't have to do everything. And as a Bryce Young apologist myself, that is music to my ears. Next up, we have the Atlanta Falcons, which, yes, they had a really interesting, very unexpected pick at the top of the draft, and I'll probably get to that some other day. But if we're completely ignoring the elephant in the room, and again, not talking about rookie quarterbacks in this video, if I'm looking for the best value pick of the weekend for the Atlanta Falcons, I'm going to go with Brandon Dorlus, defensive lineman out of Oregon. There were a lot of Justin Madubuike and Michael Bennett comps thrown out for Dorlus in the pre-draft process, and I completely understand both of them. He's a 6'3", 280 to 285 pound-ish hybrid defensive lineman. I think you can put him at defensive end on early downs and just absolutely demolish tight ends. Or if you want him to play the weak side, you can put him as like a loose 5 technique against tackles, and he's going to be phenomenal against the run there. But on third down, you can kick him inside to 3 technique, like, say, Michael Bennett back in the day for Seattle, or Justin Madubuike now for the Ravens, and he's going to dominate as a pass rusher there as well. He's a really good football player and somebody who a lot of people thought were going to go in the second round. I'm not 100% sure what the issue was that caused him to fall all the way to the 4th, but he was pretty much a consensus top 75 player in this entire class, and the Falcons got him all the way at 109. So for me, that is great value. Loved that pick. For the Saints, we're going to go 90 picks later to pick 199, famously the Tom Brady pick, and we're going to talk about another defensive lineman that they took at that spot, Christian Boyd, the defensive tackle out of Northern Iowa. Christian absolutely dominated the Shrine Bowl this year. He might have been the best defensive player on the field the entire week, and even though he didn't get a combine invite, he was one of the most active players for 30 visits throughout the entire pre-draft process. It felt like he visited the entire league because everybody was really interested in Christian Boyd, and for good reason. He has a ton of power in that 6'2", 325-pound frame, and if you're assuming that he's a nose tackle just based on those measurements, you're correct, but he's more than just a nose tackle. Yes, he can anchor against the run. He can hold up against double teams. He can dominate guards one-on-one, do all the stack shed stuff. But he's more than just that. He's also a good pass rusher, which most nose tackles aren't. All they can do is just kind of go forward in a straight line and push the pocket. But Christian Boyd has legitimate pass rush moves. He's got good feet, good hips, a really nasty push-pull swim. He was one of the better interior pass rushers during all of Shrine Bowl week, and he's 325. So in terms of role, yes, he's going to play a lot of true zero. He'll play some shade for you. He'll probably play like a 2-eye, maybe a head-up 2. But on passing downs, could he line up as a 3 technique and get after it? Yeah, probably. So having that kind of positional versatility in a defensive lineman who can line up as anything from a true 0 all the way out to like a loose 3, maybe a 4-eye, that's really, really valuable to me, especially since they got him in the 6th round. He's a great player, somebody who I'm actively rooting for because he's such a good story, and I truly cannot wait to see what kind of role he carves out for himself in New Orleans. All right, finally, let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, our last team in this video. And it's also one of the only first-round picks I'm going to talk about in this video because I thought their best value was actually Graham Barton, who they got at 26th overall. Now, why is Graham Barton their best value when they also took Elijah Klein in the 6th, they took Jalen McMillan in the 3rd, Bucky Irving in the 4th. Some people would even argue for Chris Braswell in the 2nd. I mean, they got a bunch of good players here. But for me, the value that Graham Barton brings to the organization is his versatility. He's probably going to be their starting center this year. But if, say, Robert Hainsey comes to camp and is looking spectacular, he could also compete for either guard spot or maybe even compete for the right tackle spot. Not that they're completely bereft of talent at any of those positions, but Graham Barton can compete with pretty much everybody except Tristan Wirfs on this roster to be a starter. So I think having that ultimate kind of flexibility to just get your best 5 on the field, I could actually see their best 5 offensive line combination being, Wirfs at left tackle, Bredesen at left guard, Barton at center, Malk at right guard, Gadecki at right tackle, or maybe Wirfs at left, Bredesen at left, Hainsey at center, Malk at right guard, Barton at right tackle, and then you got Gadecki as your swing tackle. Like, there's a bunch of different combinations, like literally a dozen different combinations that you could do here, and it would make sense. So Barton gives them the flexibility to just get their best group on the field. He's not locked into any one position because he can start at 80% of them for this team. This improves their depth, it improves their overall talent level, and it makes Baker Mayfield's job that much easier. And ultimately, the best value pick Tampa could have made in the first round is whatever makes Baker's job easier. All right, that'll do it for me today. If you guys stuck around for this entire video, I really do appreciate it. If you have your own value picks that you want to talk about, please share them in the comments below, because I'm sure everybody has different opinions for what the best value their team got was, and there's only so many guys I can talk about in one video. So leave your own value picks down below. Let's get the discussion going, and with that, I'll see you guys later.